As Marty said, the process of assessing sustainability involves identifying key performance indicators and associated metrics. So what I'm going to discuss with you is the Livestock Environmental Assessment and Performance Partnership efforts to define the methodological basis for the metrics of sustainability. Generally speaking, life cycle assessment is the underpinning method for determining sustainability characteristics of supply chains, not just in agriculture, but more broadly. And so I want to introduce LEAP to you and describe the work that's been going on. LEAP is a multi-stakeholder partnership involving governments, the private sector, civil society, and even though it's not listed there, academics. It's established a series of technical advisory groups that's led by a steering committee, and the fundamental goal of LEAP is to improve the livestock sector's environmental performance, both from an environmental perspective, but considering also the social and economic viability. So the three pillars of sustainability are, while not always explicitly accounted in the methodology, they're in the background. It's a multi-criteria approach built on life cycle thinking and life cycle assessment. There are science-based consensus guidelines that have been published that provide LCA practitioners really with the methods, the details for how to conduct life cycle assessment in a number of sectors. Of course, nothing on this slide will be new to anyone in the room. We have more people coming to dinner. The demand for livestock products is increasing. Roger said this morning, and it's clearly known that the middle class is growing. The demand for high-quality protein is growing. The population is growing. There's more need for protein. The livestock sector is a critical provider of that. It will also provide food security because we need to have well-nourished people everywhere. It is, within the last month there was 1+ million people rioting in the streets of Caracas or demonstrating in the streets of Caracas due to hunger. This is a critical need that we face. There are other aspects of the livestock supply chain which are really critical and in probably most of our worlds not considered. In sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, livestock represents a significant asset management tool. In the first session, a gentleman who works in sub-Saharan Africa said that if you have 50 head, you're wealthy. If you have 20, you're poor. And that 70% of the transactions in livestock occur at weddings. This is a clear indication that livestock has multiple functions that are beyond the simple production of food and protein and milk, etc. Other complexities, of course, is a long market chain, and we know from Livestock's Long Shadow and our own work that there are significant environmental impacts as well as significant potential environmental benefits associated with livestock's chains. And so the LEAP partnership is recognizing this complexity, the diversity of production systems in the world, and trying to come up with a consensus-based document that will enable anybody on the planet to perform an LCA with the same fundamental assumptions. Each sector, of course, is unique, and there are sector-specific guidelines which, at the same time providing sector-specific guidance, are intentionally harmonized so that there are not really significant differences in the methodological approach between poultry and small ruminants. And this is an important thing to enable the entire livestock sector to progress without having differential metrics and performance indicators. So it's really important to understand the range of farming systems and the complexity, and this has been accounted for in the LEAP guidelines. So the fundamental activities are providing the guidance and methodology to understand environmental performance of livestock supply chains, to shape evidence-based policy measures, to provide guidance for policy, as well as to help inform business strategies. And as we well know, without ways to measure, benchmark, monitor, and assess, we will not make improvements. So we manage what we measure, and if we don't measure it, we simply don't manage it. And so that's underlying the LEAP activities as well. In terms of achievements in the first 3 years, 6 technical advisory groups, and I'll show you which they were in a moment. 300 experts from across the globe came together in a series of face-to-face meetings and had long, hard discussions about the technical details of how you collect data, how you define data quality, how you, in the absence of measurements, how you estimate information to fill in the data gaps. In addition to the 6 guidance documents that have been published, there's a global database for feed that's available on the website. The broad brush structure of all of the guidance documents begin with an understanding on the left of the raw materials that are necessary, so identifying and accounting what needs to be included. And then the feed guidelines cover everything from the production of the fertilizer and the tillage practices, etc., for both pasture grazing and row crop production through feed processing, all the way up to the animal's mouth. And so the feed guidelines would, for example, include loss of feed during the ensiling process, loss of mass during the ensiling process, or loss of feed because of the animal rejecting it and it ending up being handled in the manure system ultimately. The animal guidelines pick up at the animal's mouth and account for all of the manure handling and everything, provide guidance on all of that, and go through the processing stage as well. So the abattoir and packaging consumption is not included. So the guidelines stop at the processing gate, but will provide a foundation for anything that went beyond that. And of course, all of the inventory is accounted here, and the emissions associated with those activities are accounted here in an effort to support and understand mitigation options and potential improvements to the system. There we go. So these are the 6 guidance documents: feed, poultry, small ruminants, biodiversity, and large ruminants, some methodological notes, and the crop database that I mentioned. All of these have gone through the public review process, actually two-stage review. The first review, after the technical advisory group developed the document, it was sent to a panel of 3 experts, LCA and subject matter experts, who sent back comments. Those comments were incorporated, and then the documents were released for public review for 3 to 5 months, depending upon which one of the documents. In 2016, the pig supply and reply to the documentary Cowspiracy, so trying to debunk some of the claims in that movie. The public review on the first 3, I was the leader of the technical advisory group for the poultry sector document. We had 120 pages of comments come back. Took us several months to work through all of those, but in the end, the documents were significantly improved because of the feedback that we received from interested parties, stakeholders. Turning to current work streams, road testing, so trying to understand how useful the documents are by actually implementing them, additional technical guidance, and continuous review and updating. In terms of the road testing, we want to understand, can these documents actually be useful for life cycle practitioners to conduct an LCA across a wide variety of production systems? How clear are they? We've made recommendations to collect data in a certain way. Is that really feasible or not? So we need to have the feedback from the practitioners, and to identify gaps in the recommendations and barriers that may prevent the application of the guidance documents in particular situations. In addition, the LEAP Plus, as it's called, from 2016 to 18 is expanding to include nutrient cycling, water footprinting, and soil carbon changes. These are currently existing tags, ongoing work. Of course, those three are quite important in the beef sector. We know the large public reporting, public numbers about water being consumed, which mostly include rainfall, as was mentioned in, I think, one of yesterday's plenaries. And so trying to understand the methodologies behind this that do make sense is really important. Feed additives, and I can't remember exactly the reason. I think it was out of the scope of the feed guidelines, but there's going to be one on feed guidelines, continued work on biodiversity, and some work on ecotoxicity. Looking at the nutrient tag for a moment, there's three places where nitrogen comes into the agricultural supply chain: from lightning, nitrogen fixation by legumes, and the Haber-Bosch process. Everything else, all of the other nitrogen in the agricultural system is being recycled, right? And so understanding that recycling, as well as these new inputs, is really important if we are going to reach the goals of resource use efficiency, right? If we understand that we have limitations on the availability of these resources and we don't know how they are cycled, then we'll be at a loss to manage them to the best of our abilities. Likewise, phosphorus only comes from mines, and so the addition of phosphorus and the cycling of phosphorus and nitrogen is understood in principle, but the guidelines are attempting to provide some quantitative methods associated with how we can do that across all of the systems to support life cycle assessment. So assessing nutrient use and performance along supply chains, identify hot spots, and to ultimately estimate the total share of nutrient losses associated with livestock would be the goal of the nutrient tag. The water footprinting tag is going to be a challenge to get a consensus because there are two very different approaches. One is really a hydrology approach that looks at water volumes used in certain processes. The life cycle assessment approach says, well, that water volume used in one place doesn't have the same impact as the water that's been used in another place. And so there's the water footprinting approach versus the ISO approach. This is the water use LCA working group. They are actually all in the same room, and thankfully I'm on the nutrient tag, so I'm avoiding some of the fireworks, I think, in that group. But the effort to try and provide a unified set of methods for assessing water use in livestock is ongoing. I think it's really important that this group, the GRSB and the Canadian and U.S. roundtables, contribute to that conversation. So similarly to the nutrient tag, the goal is to come up with methodologies that work for livestock by providing methods and metrics to identify those systems which are more or less sustainable in their water consumption, and to try to make recommendations for how to ameliorate the hotspots associated with water use. Finally, a newly formed tag. I think they're still actually requesting members. If anyone's interested, please contact me. I'll get you the I'll put you in contact with the people who you need to be in contact with at FAO. if you're interested in becoming a member of the soil carbon change tag. Obviously, with the beef sector being so reliant on grasslands, there are no beef produced that don't live on pasture some time of their life. And understanding the benefits of soil carbon sequestration associated with proper pasture management is really, really very important. Not only for the beef sector, but I think broadly, understanding the ways in which grasslands are managed is really critical, because it serves as a potential for a carbon sink that we don't have a good handle on yet. Not that there aren't good science behind it, but there's no consensus, and that's sort of the idea behind this, is to drive towards consensus. So that's an introduction to the Livestock Environmental Assessment and Performance Partnership.